Happy Hump Day! Welcome to ScreenJunkies Universe. It's Wednesday. It's a thing. It's a term. It's very commonly used. It means that you're at the top of the week, and now you can only go down. Welcome. We're going to be doing that with you today. I'm Roth Cornet. This is Dan Murrell.
Hello.
Ed Greer is here.
Hey, guys.
What's going on, Joe Starr?
I always thought it was a day that you listened to the Humpty Dance by Digital
do you
Underground.
remember how to do the Humpty Dance?
Yeah.
Can you demonstrate that
Well,
currently?
first of all, people have to tell Humpty that he's real funny looking, and that's all right because he...
Yeah. We're going to get right into the Avengers now. And then midway through, as a surprise, somewhere in our show, Joe will do the Humpty Dance. Question for us today is how planned out is the MCU? We also have Dan with an exclusive interview and many more wonderful things to talk about. But let's talk about that Avengers. Joss Whedon's been talking. This is via /film, via IGN, via, I don't know.
Joss Whedon.
Via Joss Whedon. And it all starts, I guess, with his mother and then the Big Bang. So this is what he had to say. He was talking about the Avengers and the introduction of Thanos, and that he was very, very happy with how it turned out. But he said, actually, at the time, I had no real plan around that. In an interview around the time that Thanos was introduced, in the post-credit scenes of the Avengers, you guys all remember this. You were in the theater, and he showed up, and the whole theater went, half the theater went, what? And then the other half of the theater went, what? So this is what he said at the time. We have to stay grounded. It's part of what makes the Marvel Universe click. Their relationship to the real world, it's science fiction, and Thanos is not out of the mix, but Thanos was never really meant to be the next villain. He's always been an overlord of villainy and darkness, meaning he was behind all the villainy, but not necessarily the next big bad of the universe. Right now, what he said, now that this has all come to fruition in Infinity War, he says, honestly, I kind of hung Thanos out to dry. I love Thanos. I love his apocalyptic vision, his love affair with death. I love his power. But all of those are really weird things to say. But I don't really understand it. He had a lot of power and he was cool in the comics. And I'm like, Thanos is the ultimate Marvel villain. And then I was like, I don't actually know what I would do with Thanos. So I liked what the Russo brothers did so much. And I thought that Josh Brolin killed it. And they did an amazing job of keeping that performance on screen. But it wasn't like I was like, here's a set of directions. I was like, I'm going to get through Ultron, nap for 4 years, and then I'll come out to the premiere, which I did. I was like, this is so cool.
He says more than I say
I say like a fair bit, and I'm trying to curb it. Thank you.
But no, Joss outliked you possibly.
He possibly did.
Yeah.
That said, I'm not sure I believe this entirely, because it feels like to me the things that show up in those post-credit scenes are less to do with directorial choices and more to do with Kevin Feige's long-term plan. I think he did like sort of go to bat for Thanos because he really liked him as a character, but that's sort of, I don't know, it's like a particular one director of Game of Thrones saying, let's do a heel turn on Tyrion. No, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, well, and George R.R. Martin would make that call, not one director. But how planned out is it? Is it something they just threw in and said, we'll figure it out later?
I mean, I don't think it's really, I think they have broad outlines, but if you look at the just movie to movie, they drop Stephen Strange's name into the middle of Winter Soldier. That, given the timeline, that makes no sense for that to be there. If you look at the version of Ragnarok that's in Age of Ultron, that's what that was setting up, it's completely different from what they ended up doing many years later with the actual Ragnarok. So I feel like they have a broad outline, but then they also change it. And Humans, no, we're not doing that.
Feels like 50-50, but setting up something in a post-credits scene feels a little bigger to me, especially if it's Thanos, than saying something off the cuff as a line.
I think we were always going to get Thanos. I really, really do. I think that's always been a plan, because it's not just Feige and it's not just his directors. There was the brain trust for a long time, Brian Michael Bendis and a lot of other Marvel writers. I don't think that brain trust exists in these phases anymore, but early on, you had those guys credited as the guys working with Feige to kind of go, this would be cool, yes. So I do think that this was coming, but I think Feige's smart enough, like Dan, to your point, to kind of keep things. I think he has a very long distance Hail Mary plan, but I think he keeps it flexible enough for the instance of like a Ragnarok that it can shift depending on what's needed.
But they didn't even know what they were doing with Thanos. What was it, Guardians? With a fine, I'll do it myself. What was that? Was that the end of what movie? Age of Ultron. Was that Age of Ultron? Again, him putting the gauntlet again, that makes no sense compared to the continuity that they would accept later. So Thanos to me has always been this character that they just throw into a movie to keep him alive.
He's visually look different too every time we see him.
He looks visually different. Like, I don't think they've ever had any real constructive idea of what to do with Thanos than he's at the end.
Yeah, well, the first Thanos that was in the Avengers had just come back from Cancun because that's why he's so much darker. He got a tan.
Yeah,
and then they designed him a little different in the next one. I do agree with you, Dan. It's paprika. They considered him paprika until it came time to make a meal that's basically half paprika, which was the Infinity War.
What meal is that?
I don't know. I'm not a chef.
Big old bowl of Thanos.
Vision would like it though.
Oh
He's a big fan of paprika.
He loves paprika. I think that's true. Yeah, I think they just had Thanos on a board. Step 3, Infinity War. And I think in between that, there was a whole lot of, I'll do it myself. Nah, that didn't quite work. Ragnarok visions, those didn't quite line up. Stark visions.
They set up a situation where they could pull the trigger on Thanos whenever interest started to wane. Mm-hmm. I'll do it myself. If people were like, I don't really like this anymore, they throw him in the next movie or the movie after that. Mm-hmm. So I think it was always
pulling back.
Yeah, almost like an escape hatch for the whole thing, and then they waited they waited much longer than any of us thought to introduce him. And I think that's a testament to how successful each of the movies were in succession. They could not have predicted that Ant-Man was going to be that big. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, poor Ant-Man.
I think they generally know
Ant-Man
they're
that
doing
big.
3 movies either way. You take the current movie, I think they generally have an idea of what they're doing. 3 to 4 movies, maybe, on either side. And then past that, how can you?
I think that's why they call them phases too.
Yeah.
I mean, because in one phase you can know all the steps, and then you step to another phase, and then other steps present themselves. I think it's very good that even the media picked up on. Well, I mean, I guess Marvel started saying it. We are in phase this, phase that, and the media picked it up, and now we know which phase they're in. We're in phase 4 now.
Yeah. Well, cusping on the end of it, but it's. I really think it does function very much like a good television show. So for a show like Breaking Bad, for example, Vince Gilligan really, really knew what he wanted to do with that show, and it was pretty clear about it. Mm-hmm. But along the way, he did adjust. According to what was working. Jesse became a much bigger character, for example, the co-lead in the show, and that wasn't necessarily planned from day one, but he still stayed on course. You know.
And I appreciate the concern of what do you do with Thanos if you're the director that's been tasked with putting him in the post-credit scene, and you're doing Age of Ultron, and as far as you're probably going to stick around for a while at that point. He's such an overpowered character. Aside the point for Joss Whedon that, if it's not a 17-year-old innocent girl that doesn't wear shoes, like he has a hard time dealing with characters outside of that. Like Thanos is a really overpowered character. The Russo brothers did their best, I think, to keep that very overpowered character interesting. It meant a lot of things in Infinity War were inconsistent. Has a fist fight with Hulk that he wins, but then has a hard time tussling with Steve Rogers, stuff like that. But overall, I think they've done a pretty good job of making this character who, even on panel in comic books, you'd turn pages and just go, I get it. He's really, oh man.
That's my
Look
girlfriend.
at that. Yeah.
That's my girlfriend.
Yeah.
Like the whole time he's talking about that.
I love that idea, but I think the reason that I kind of wanted to see that play out is because All That Jazz is one of my favorite movies, if not my favorite movie, and I know that's weird. But if you guys aren't familiar with All That Jazz,
Does that have Roy Scheider in it?
It is in his greatest performance, and I mean this, his greatest performance ever as Bob Fosse, directed by Bob Fosse, about death. And he is in love with Jessica Lange, who is Death. And I remember I was doing an interview with Josh Brolin right when he was cast as Thanos for something else. What would have been around then? Dan?
Around maybe the first Sicario?
Yeah, maybe that.
Men in Black 3?
Maybe that. I can't remember. But I was like, talking about it, and he was like, I don't really know that much about the character yet. And I said, go watch All That Jazz. It's basically that, but like super-y. But that's not what came to pass. So that was very bad advice, and I've been meaning to apologize to you, Josh Brolin.
When we see the first True Blue superhero musical, the genre is dead. I think that'll be them stretching too much.
You think so?
Yeah.
Although rejuvenated.
Yeah,
Oh, well,
exactly.
you know.
Although I do really like the idea that on day one of Infinity War, Josh Brolin came onto set with some very specific Fosse-based ideas, and everyone was kind of like,
And that Thanos was just every once in a while like
Yeah.
Fosse. Okay.
Fosse does like to snap, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Mm,
Oh, he does.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. It all
Comes full
comes
circle.
together.
They share
Boom.
that in
Circle.
common.
we found it.
So I think we're all in the same conclusion. They are planned but flexible within that. I mean, they obviously changed course with Thor. They changed him tonally.
Well, it was
I
very.
think they changed course around 2013.
Yeah.
I think they saw Age of Ultron and they saw Thor: The Dark World and they saw the direction they were going, and I think they saw the other movies that were in the marketplace and they said, we have to switch this up because it's not going to work. And
Well,
that's
yeah, and I also think that Roth was very astute by comparing this process to a TV show. Because a TV show can go on, and a TV show knows to a certain extent that I have a certain amount of reel, and they plant little seeds, and they vary things based upon audience reaction, and which characters get more popular, yada yada yada. So it's very smart that you likened it to TV, because this series of movies is more like television than I think any series of movies we've seen.
Yeah, it was a good episode.
Yeah.
And I think
Last
you've seen
episode.
that plan. Like you mentioned Ragnarok. I think you sort of see in that plan where it's like, yeah, we're going to Ragnarok, but do we really want to have like a really heavy apocalypse episode like right before we go into the
before,
Infinity
yeah.
War episode? And it shifts tone.
I think if you were going to look at the MCU as a whole, I think that the first Guardians movie is the hinge on which the MCU sort of just pivots.
Yeah.
And that you can see from there, that's where they had the backing to say, okay, we can do really crazy, weird stuff, and we don't have to fit into the mold. Not that movies like Winter Soldier did, but I think there's a tone that the movies before Guardians has, and there's a tone that a lot of the movies after Guardians have, and I think that's because they realized they had the license to really go out there and do crazy stuff.
And embrace people's visions. You know what I mean? Guardians had a distinct vision, not saying Iron Man didn't, but if you told me Iron Man was written by 5 screenwriters, oh, wait a minute, it was.
Yeah.
And if you told me that it was directed with Kevin Feige breathing down somebody's neck, oh, wait a minute, it was. Now, and then you look at Guardians or even Ragnarok, you're just like, wow. I think that person got to play a little one-on-one offense. You know what I mean? I think that person
Yeah.
got to run his own plays rather than the coaches.
I remember being like, you guys have seen Hunt for the Wilder People, Taika's movie right before. It's so great. If you haven't seen Hunt for the Wilder People, check it out. It's hilarious. And there's also now a Deadpool 2 tie-in. Hi. So I remember interviewing him about Hunt for the Wilder People at Sundance and going, you've had so much creative freedom in your career because it's just like you doing so many of the things. And how are you going to deal with kind of the differences of the big studio? And he just leans in and he goes, I don't know. But he seems to have handled it quite well.
Well, he did it right. He did movies that prepared him for all of these eventualities, much like the Russo brothers. I was watching some episodes of Community, and a writer from Infinity War wrote on Community, and obviously directors that went on to do major movies, and the Russo brothers, obviously. And you just see that these teams get together and they learn each other's sensibilities and they go forward through time.
Yeah.
And now the Marvel Universe is better for it
Yeah.
because of Community and the like. That's just funny.
It's very meta. These teams come together and you move forward through time and are better
Wow.
together. It's the story of us, you guys. You know what people are doing less of? They're not doing the cable so much, you guys. Cord cutting is accelerating. I don't know if that was Fallon or Leno. What was I doing?
Pat
there?
Sajak?
Was it Pat Sajak?
It was a good segue.
Fallon would have done it with like children's instruments.
Yeah.
A Zazaphone. Is that a thing? So cord cutting is accelerating faster than we think. This is via THR. Basically, here's the projections. The research says, it's a research firm called eMarketer, says that people are continuing to rapidly cut the cord. We'll reach 33 million this year, while last year it was far more than the 27.1 million projected. This is a lot of numbers. Basically, it's a ton of people. 39 million by the end of 2019, 45 million after that, 50 million a year after that, and by 2022, they estimate it'll be 55.1 million will have cut their cords. They're talking about how people are going into partnerships with Netflix, and that may have, and certainly those partnerships have already happened, but that may have an effect in terms of actually slowing it down if people want to continue to watch TV. Though that doesn't totally make sense to me, because I think the way a lot of people think about Netflix now when it comes to something like Riverdale, for example, if you don't watch it on the CW, basically, and you know that it's going to come to Netflix a year later, then your mental scale of the Riverdale seasons just moves up a notch to match Netflix.
I can't wait for Riverdale to come out next year.
Yeah, exactly. And they talked about the growth of streaming, which we know about, which is basically YouTube is 190 million in 2018, the number of viewers, followed in the US, followed by Netflix at 147.5 million, Amazon 88.7 million, Hulu 55 million, HBO Now 17.1 million. You're hanging in there. And Sling TV at 6.8 million.
Get 'em, Sling.
Get it, Sling. But YouTube to me is sort of, it's just its own animal. So it's almost like you're really talking about a completely different kind of content there. It's really Netflix and Amazon where the conversation is as compared to cable. None of this is a surprise to anyone, but Dan, do you think that there will be adjustments in terms of how deals are made around television? They're already starting to be.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't really bad news for the cable companies, because where people are going to get their internet, same people. They are going to have to look at ways to boost revenue, though, if people cut their cable, and if
landline
there
phones
are no regulations in place to keep them from throttling services, then maybe that's how they do it. But that's a whole other conversation. I think that this is a sea change in advertising, because advertising is still struggling to adjust to the new space, and I think they fall back a lot on traditional advertising. Like, well, we advertise on television. They can't really go on radio anymore. What's the point of really advertising on radio? Radio is, basically, I hate to say it, dead. I mean, some people listen to radio, but certainly not in the numbers that they used to. So, and I think this is
NPR.
For the networks, obviously. Well, NPR is different. That's here. The NPR, tens of millions of people are not listening to NPR nationwide. Well, I'm sure they are. Whatever. I don't want to get into an NPR debate.
As we so often do on this show.
As we so often do.
As long as it's quiet.
But yeah, I think where this is really going to affect it is the networks. Obviously, they have to make money, and if advertisers are going to start paying them less revenue because they're getting fewer viewers, then they have to figure out, do we put that on the on-demand stuff, which people are using more and more? Do we shift it to some kind of an online presence? I mean, I think that's really what it's going to be, because even if you look at the licensing fees that the NFL pays, that's based off of networks. That's based off of viewership. That's, and if that starts going away, well then, do those licensing fees go down? How do these things stay solvent? I mean, that's who has to worry. I think the cable companies are going to become the internet companies more and more. But yeah, I think that's going to be the main thing, is like, what happens to advertisers, and how do you continue to support throwing money into programming if your viewership is dwindling dramatically?
I mean, what happens to advertisers in my mind is the subscription services, that's where they get the money from, just like HBO. But what happens to advertisers is they need to, frankly, raise how much they're paying for digital media, because that's where they're going to be able to advertise at all. And the difference between what they will pay for one view on television and broadcast and what they will pay for one view on the internet is inappropriate to the reality of the situation that they're faced with. Joe Starr?
Yep.
What do you think?
I'll talk to you about advertising for a minute. I think that you made an interesting point where on cable, I think it's less situations for like shows and stuff like that, but a lot of the NFL, the NBA, I think that's really interesting, because they aren't sort of able to make the jump to a Netflix, to streaming as easily. ESPN does have their own streaming services and packages, but those things don't traditionally, I think, make the jump to streaming as well. Whereas like with a Riverdale or something, it's like, yeah, I'll wait a year and I'll watch it and I'll binge it, and that's fine. And that network can make a deal with Netflix and sort of make some money that way. But in terms of like local sports and stuff like that, when those views are really starting to dwindle, I think those people are going to get really hard. And also, yes, the branding from network and studio to internet company is coming very quickly.
And yeah, local news, that's the other thing, is that is completely run and dominated by advertising and selling local advertising. So if people are cutting their cords and they're not getting that content, what happens to your local
Well,
That's
part of why-
good
news
question.
station?
So
Well, that's
where are
why-
people watching their news?
Oh, well, that's part of why I think Sinclair has been able to come in and just buy up so many local stations, because basically they're going and they're saying, you're going to die, we're your only lifeline. And then Sinclair is able to offer to advertisers, hey, the numbers in just this county might not be worth it for you to advertise, but here's a region. Here's what we can offer you. Here's what we can package. So that's why I think Sinclair has been able to take over as quickly as they've been able to.
That's a really good
By the way,
point.
read this.
Word
Again,
for
that's
word.
another debate.
I get my news on PBS, so that's why I don't watch advertising on my news.
Well, no, I definitely agree with Joe that there's going to be a lot more sports and a lot more disasters in the future to try to keep networks
Yay?
alive. No, not yay. Sports and disasters,
Yeah.
because those are the things where live
News
television
cycle.
and news cycle thrive. So we're gonna, something happens in Papua New Guinea, we're gonna get a bunch of coverage. This thing about the Thai boys who got in the cave. Thai boys in a cave ain't a story 5 years ago, maybe, but it's a 24-hour news cycle right now, maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But right now, it's round the cycle, and then there's already a movie, and that's what live television does well. Oh, Jessica's in the well. What's happening? Put a boom mic down there.
This
That's
feels
what live
very
television
much like
does.
Nightcrawler, right?
Yeah.
Where it's
Yes.
like things,
Yes.
yeah.
If it bleeds, it leads, and those things aren't easily. They are easily packageable in YouTube videos, but the magic is gone. If it's live, you see something.
The real game changer would be if one of these, if a Hulu or an Amazon or a Netflix is able to strike a deal, and I don't even know how this would work, but is able to strike a deal with something like an ESPN, some kind of an exclusivity thing where it's like, you can get ESPN now exclusively on Netflix,
Yeah, I
exclusively
think
on
YouTube's
Amazon.
doing something like
Disney's
that.
about to own 60% of Hulu, and they own ESPN, so that's not outside
That
the realm
would be
of
that would be a
possibility.
game changer where
Yeah.
they look at the revenue stream and they look at the number of people that are cutting the cord and they say it makes the most sense for us to take this and put it. I guess if you're right, if it's Disney and they own the majority of Hulu on Hulu, and now if you want ESPN, you have to sign up for Hulu. That's a game changer, and I think that's the kind of stuff that we're gonna see.
I mean, we're getting into a weird world. I watch the NBA Finals. Maybe a lot of our audience doesn't, but I watch the NBA Finals, and the NBA Finals were sponsored by YouTube. That was the biggest sponsor for this year's NBA Finals.
That's really interesting. And we were at Comic-Con this past weekend, and the biggest spender there in terms of advertisement and kind of escape rooms and events and eventizing it and getting their name out was Amazon. Amazon was there in full force, and it was very interesting to witness sort of the sea change at Comic-Con is reflected in the sea change of the industry, where the studios, the really big studios and the films that we're used to seeing there, they weren't there so much. Their footprint was pretty light, especially Marvel, especially for the 10-year of the MCU, because they know they don't need it anymore, and the investment, the time, money, cost isn't worth the reward in their minds, versus an Amazon who does need it and is trying to get that attention.
And just one last thing on this. Hulu should not be discounted because Hulu presently has the largest repository of television I've ever seen in my life. I can watch every episode of every version of the Newhart Show on
Hulu's
Hulu.
not discounted, and certainly with Disney having 60% of it, I'm sure they'll find a way to make it work. Like Dan's suggestion would be a game changer for Hulu too in terms of a business model. But the only reason that Hulu is in a little different playing field than say a Netflix is because of the licensing, where they're limited domestically and Netflix is not. They are global and they are everywhere.
Well, that hybrid idea is fascinating. Here's our archive, you can binge stuff, but we also have these live options for you, especially for sports. I think that'll be really fascinating. That's one of the reasons why, to me, when WWE launched their pay network, I thought that was really, really groundbreaking, because it was like, hey, here's our whole archive, but then every time we do a live event, you can watch live instead of ordering an $80 pay-per-view once a month. You pay us $10 a month, you can watch live, you can watch the archive. So when you get someone the size of an Amazon or a Netflix who can do a big deal like that with like the World Cup or the NFL or something like that, I think that's when you're going to see some really, really, really big game changers. I think that's going to be really cool.
Do we feel good? Ed, do we feel good? We feel complete on cord cutting?
good,
Yeah. Okay, good.
Mine is cut.
We're
I'm
gonna-
no longer connected to my mom.
I pay for way too many things, and I have to actually.
I have so many
I have
cords.
so many cords and
So many.
things. I got to sit down and kind of do a budget.
I would
around
have
that.
cut
Power
but my
cords.
girlfriend is very much obsessed with like cooking shows and all these different things where there's too many ways to get these different shows. So that she would have to like Sling doesn't have this array of cooking shows. Hulu doesn't have that array of things. Netflix doesn't have that. So
Netflix
for
has
her,
baking, but Hulu has Gordon Ramsay.
Dude,
Yeah.
exactly. Like they have the British baking shows on this one, but yeah. So Guy Fieri's on that one. So that's what's kept her cord uncut.
It's Coke
Me
or Pepsi.
too. So I have cable. I have Amazon Prime. I have Hulu Plus or Prime or what I think it's Plus. I have Netflix. It's too much. Guys, I'm overwhelmed.
My girl has the CBS app.
I'm not getting that.
We
I
have-
refuse.
we have
I draw the
CBS.
line. I draw the line.
We
I
have
draw the line
CBS.
at that and a few other things.
Filmstruck.
I have Filmstruck.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's worth it.
It's a lot. That's definitely
well,
worth it. But it's a lot.
It's a lot of stuff. It's very
Yeah,
expensive.
A lot of things.
Somebody come do us a budget. We're not good at math. Hello. We do have some fun things for you to watch, though.
Yes.
Which one is Mr. Hal Rudnick went to Paris and he talked to Mr. Henry Cavill, and I won't tell you what happens, but it's very fun and charming, and we highly suggest that you go check that out on the main channel right now. There's a Movie Fights tomorrow that we filmed live in front of an audience at Comic-Con. That's another really, really fun one. And I think you will enjoy the outcome of that fight. And we're going to go to your interview, Dan. But one final thought here is that we've been talking a lot. We lost a friend, John Schnepp, this past week at Comic-Con, which really was his home. There continues to be a campaign to help support Holly Payne, his fiance, with the medical expenses, with sort of the cost of this situation for her across the board. And so if you can, please do go support that GoFundMe. We'll have a link below, and our thoughts are continuing to be with Holly and those closest to Schnepp. Thank you again for your support in that area. Dan, we were at Comic-Con. You were able to do a Star Trek interview.
Well, yes.
Sort of.
I would have made it all Star Trek, but there was other things afoot, other great topics afoot. Yeah, it is. There's a movie, a documentary coming out called From the Bridge, and I got a chance to talk to the director of the documentary, Spencer F. Lee. I got to talk to Kerry O'Quinn, who you may not know his name, but you certainly know his work. He founded many fan magazines, the two most prominent being Fangoria and Starlog, which for people of my ilk and older were kind of the behind the scenes before there was the internet, before there was anything devoted to how things were done or what was happening behind the scenes. And then it was a huge and very nervous thing for me to meet Nichelle Nichols, who is a legend. She played Uhura in the original Star Trek series and the Star Trek films, and is I think for so many people and for so many different reasons, just a keystone in pop culture and culture. So if I'm a little nervous in this interview, that's why. But I thought it was a really great discussion about the kind of evolution of being a fan. This group of people have been there literally since the beginning. Star Trek conventions were some of the earliest, iterations of current pop culture, lowercase f fandom. So I was happy to do this interview for uppercase f fandom.
Take a look.
Fantastic.
Hey everybody, so excited to keep coming at you here from San Diego, and we have some very special guests on set with us today. First, he is the director of the new documentary From the Bridge, Spencer F. Lee. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
You probably know him as the founder, creator of two of the most popular and influential fan magazines of all time, Starlog, Fangoria, among many others. Kerry O'Quinn, thank you for joining us.
Delighted.
And our third guest needs no introduction, but I will anyway, and I'm super nervous because I'm a big Star Trek fan, but you know her as a legend in the entertainment industry and Lieutenant Uhura from Star Trek and the Star Trek films, Ms. Nichelle Nichols. Thank you so much for joining us. So From the Bridge is a documentary about fans, it's about fandom, it's about conventions.
Yes.
What drew you all to cover this topic, which seems bigger than ever now?
I wanted to make a living documentary that talked about the evolution of fandom, and I wanted it to be told by the iconic creators themselves as well as the fans.
Ms. Nichols, you've been coming to conventions. I mean, Star Trek conventions were sort of like the first Comic-Cons. Has anything changed over the years, or have they just gotten bigger? Is it still the same interacting with the fans and
The second that you said.
it's just gotten bigger?
It's just gotten bigger. The fans know everything that we're talking about. So you got to be very careful being an actor, that you're not an actor, you're that character. It works very well with the fans, and it works very well for me because I feel that I've gone into that character.
Michelle, your very first convention, were you encountering fans dressed as Uhura?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
all over the place.
Carrie, nowadays there's so much information available, but for a long time, magazines like Starlog, like Fangoria, were sort of the way that most fans were able to learn about the behind the scenes. What was that like, kind of being the resource?
The magazines were the only source for fans to not only find out the kind of behind the scene secret of how the magic is done, but also to know that there were other people like them out there. We opened the door and launched a lot of stuff which now is kind of commonplace. Literally, magazines were the only way that people got this information, and I'm happy to say that there is a company in Dallas, Texas that has bought all of my magazine titles, and they are bringing Fangoria back to life as a printed magazine. If that is successful, they want to bring Starlog back to life as a printed magazine next year.
What particular TV shows and movies did you like growing up?
I grew up in the 1950s where George Pal was the producer-director who was doing the science fiction movies. He did The War of the Worlds, he did When Worlds Collide, he did The Conquest of Space. And what I loved, and what I think all fans do love, is heroes. My first one was Mighty Mouse. I started with a rodent as my hero. And then I went on to Captain Marvel. And then I've gone on to other heroes that are much more realistic now, but they were always people that inspired me to make something wonderful of my life.
Michelle, were they your loves as well, those shows?
Desperately. In my household where I grew up, when they came on, everybody had to be quiet, you know. And you didn't say, all right, everybody be quiet, it's on. Everybody knew.
Well, it's great to hear things that people that we are fans of, to hear what they're fans of, and we could talk about it all day, but I think we have to wrap it up. But we do want to thank you so much for joining us. And FromTheBridgeMovie.com is where you can find out
FromTheBridgeMovie.com.
where you can find out about the documentary. Spencer F. Lee, Carrie O'Quinn, Ms. Michelle Nichols, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.